All right. Hey YouTube, I'm Lucky, and in today's video, I'm going over the complete hand cannon ranking list for PvE this time. If you haven't watched my other video, I did a complete hand cannon tier list for PvP hand cannons, and this one is going to be for PvE, so the complete opposite paradigm of Destiny 2. And this shifts things completely on its head. It's actually really funny to see the difference between PvE god rolls and PvP god rolls and compare the difference and how they fit in the meta of the game, because on the PvP side, you almost always want 120s right now, and you almost never want 180s. And on the PvE side, it's almost completely flipped the other way. So maybe that's how Bungie's balancing things. Who knows what they're up to? I mean, it is kind of good that, certain weapons are good in one activity and not the other. But either way, leave that down in the comment section below. Would you rather have one hand cannon be the best across PvP and PvE? But before we jump right into this and start ranking our first weapons and going through all of the god rolls of every legendary hand cannon that's currently in the game that's not Sunset, first I need to break down a few things that are really, really important to cover, okay? PvE is separated into two categories. You've got low end and high end. Low end is like strikes, patrols, you've got lost sectors and low level nightfalls, things like that. And then on the high end, you'd have like high level nightfalls, grandmasters, and maybe even you'd clump raids into that category, because that is like the more higher level and more difficulty challenging PvE. So sometimes certain hand cannons are good for certain activities and they're not good for other activities. So keep that in mind. And I will try to be fair when ranking these weapons for both low-end PvE and high-end PvE. And for the sake of, making this a more simplistic video without having to go into all these different nuances, I'm going to compare strikes to Grandmaster strikes, because I feel like that's the perfect dichotomy within the game, right? You've got just regular strikes and weapons and hand cannons that are effective for that, and then you've got Grandmaster strikes, okay? So they're completely opposite in terms of their leveling and which hand cannon you would take into that activity. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. I have everything up here, and it is all in alphabetical order. So we're going to start ranking the first hand cannon. First up, we have the Ace of Spades, okay? The Ace of Spades is a extremely strong weapon. Obviously, it's an exotic, though, so one thing to keep in mind is that exotics, you have to use your exotic slot on your hand cannon, which is going to be a bit problematic when using this weapon, because you kind of want to use your exotic on a different slot, if I'm going to be completely honest. You've got Anarchy in the game, you've got Deathbringer, and you choose to pick your exotic as your hand cannon. That's really not going to be the best decision overall in terms of meta. So unfortunately, any hand cannon that's an exotic is going to be weighed down because of that, especially because a lot of the exotic hand cannons just don't shine as much in the current PvE meta. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this video, but the Ace of Spades is really, really good at what it is designed to do. Basically, in the current meta right now, you've got special ammo weapons, primary ammo weapons, and power ammo weapons, okay? Your primary ammo weapons, which is going to be almost all these hand cannons, except Ariana's Vow, are designed basically for ad clear. That's what you want to use them for. And so when we talk about the god rolls and the best hand cannons, we're talking about which hand cannons are the best for ad clear, for strikes, or Grandmaster strikes, okay? The Ace of Spades is actually a really good weapon for ad clear. It has some great perks on it. I mean, we've got Memento Mori, which gives it just a damage boost that has no timer on it. It has Firefly. I mean, it is actually one of the better ad clear weapons. Using your exotic slot on a hand cannon, though, is a bit of a weird decision, and unfortunately, because of that reason, I have to put it in the A tier category. Still a very solid choice, though, and if you use this in strikes, you will definitely appreciate this weapon. It can clear ads like crazy. Moving on to the next one, we have the Ancient Gospel, which is a 140 archetype. Not the strongest in PvE. The strongest is going to be the 180s, because faster damage output equals just better in PvE almost across the board when it comes to primary ammo weapons. You just want to spew out as many bolts as fast as possible, especially in strikes, because enemies die one shot anyways, so you might as well just use the faster fire rate weapons. The Ancient Gospel does have some really good rolls to it, though. It can roll with Dragonfly here, which would be obviously really good for ad clear. It can roll Swashbuckler, which could be good for ad clear, and Kill Clip, along with that rapid hit. So I am going to take the Ancient Gospel, and I'm going to put it actually in the B tier category here for that reason. And the reason why it's going down in the B tier category is because it's effective for ad clear, but it's not the best archetype. It doesn't make Warmind cells, and it doesn't have the crazy busted perk in the game right now, which is a payload perk. Explosive payload, timed payload is what you want if you're going to have an S tier weapon. And when this whole entire chart's done, it's going to look pretty lopsided, I know, but there's a few hand cannons in the game that are literally so unbelievably strong that to put any other hand cannon in that category is absolutely wrong, and I just won't do it. I have to put there's 3 hand cannons in the S tier category, and all the other ones have to go below it. And you'll understand by the end of this video what I'm talking about if you don't already know by watching my videos regularly. So next up, we have the bottom dollar hand cannon. Now this is the 120 archetype. The 120s are some of the toughest ones to use in the game, simply because the fire rate is slow, the magazine is small, the reload is terrible. These 120s are really tough to use. And if you're going to use one, you're going to need an absolute god roll. You're going to want to get as big a magazine as you possibly can, as fast a reload as you possibly can. And even though this does have that really strong perk, explosive payload, I just can't stand behind using a 120 in PvE that often. You're just going to end up reloading so often, reloading slow, and it's just not going to feel nearly as good as the other archetypes. The 140s are just across the board better than the 120s, and the 180s are almost across the board better than the 140s. So for the bottom dollar, I'm actually going to put this bottom dollar all the way down here in the B category as well. And the reason why it's going to be here with the Ancient Gospel, which is a weapon that fires faster than it, is simply because this can roll explosive payload, and explosive payload is still super strong, and you do want to get explosive payload. I have one with explosive payload, and I love this weapon actually, but unfortunately, I have to put it in this category with the Waking Vigil, which does not get explosive payload, but has that faster fire rate, so it has that advantageous. So that's why they're both in the same category. Moving on to the next one, we're going to have break all the rules, of course, right? The Criminal's Dagger, the 120 RPM. This is going to be the only 120 RPM hand cannon that I'm going to put in the A tier category. And you might think I'm crazy before I do this. Let me explain. The Criminal's Dagger, you can't even get this gun anymore, so it doesn't really matter because probably not a lot of people have this roll, but it can roll explosive payload and time payload in the same slot, which is that broken perk, does 20% more damage across the board. And then in the other slot, you can get triple tap, which gives you free ammo, or you can get auto loading holster, or even outlaw. I mean, you can get some really crazy perks with this Criminal's Dagger. If you have one of these rolls out there, I am super sad and super angry because the rolls that this weapon can get are actually so amazing in the current meta right now. This is actually a really nasty weapon, probably one of the better weapons for Grandmaster ad clear, but again, you can't get it, and I am going to put it in the A tier category, and a lot of people are going to be salty maybe because 120s in the PvE meta aren't necessarily the strongest, but this weapon just, you can't deny the perks that this weapon can get. It is easy. It's going to be the only 120 RPM hand cannon that I put in the A tier category, so just keep that in mind. And again, I'm super jealous to anyone that has that roll out there. If you have like an auto loading payload roll, that's crazy, or triple tap payload, that's a really good roll. Next up, we're going to talk about an exotic hand cannon, the Crimson. Now, this is like a pulse rifle type hand cannon. It shoots 3 bursts, and it does have the effect that kills with this weapon heal the wielder, and stuff like that is really, really strong in the current PvE meta. And because of that reason, I am actually going to put this weapon up higher than you might expect, and I'm actually going to put it in the A tier category. The reason being is that getting your health back from getting a kill is extremely advantageous. I mean, often you're shooting ads, you have tons of ads shooting you, you're getting sniped in the back, all different angles, and getting your health back from kills is actually really, really good and actually really, really helpful. And I would encourage people to use this more, especially if you feel comfortable with using, if you have a really good god rolled special ammo rocket or special ammo weapon sniper, and then a god rolled rocket, rather, a legendary is what I meant to say, then you would pair really well with the Crimson, and then you'd have a really solid overall build. You'd clear all the ads, and you'd almost never die, because every time you kill an ad, you get your health back. You have great damage DPS for the boss with a rocket and a sniper combo. So it's like, honestly, this is actually not a half bad build overall. Not a lot of people are going to get behind this and use this, but honestly, give the Crimson a try if you haven't yet. In PvE, it's actually pretty strong. Next up, we're going with the Dire Promise, all right? The Dire Promise is a 140 archetype legendary hand cannon. Unfortunately, I love the Dire Promise in PvP, but it does not have any place really in the PvE world. I'm going to actually put the Dire Promise all the way down in the C ranking here, and a big feels bad if you don't agree with this, but it definitely belongs here in the C tier ranking. The reason being, it's not the best archetype, so it's the 140. It's not the worst, but it's not the best. It's that middle one. And then it has some pretty terrible damage boosting perks. You've got only Swashbuckler is the damage boosting perk that it can get. It can get Overflow, which is fire. It can get triple tap, and it can get auto loading. So it does have some good reload based and magazine based perks right there, but without like Rampage on it or One for All, those really nasty, really strong hand cannon perks, or without it being a 180, it belongs all the way down here in the C tier category. So feels bad for the Dire Promise. On to the next one, we have the Ariana's Vow. Okay, now this is going to be the only energy ammo hand cannon, and it is an exotic as well. And you might think, well, you don't really want to use your exotic slot on a hand cannon that's an energy. Maybe if you haven't used this yet, you need to understand that this is an S tier exotic. Okay, this thing is nasty for destroying barriers, and barriers get just decimated by it. This is one of my go-to weapons when it comes to barrier champions inside Grandmasters. It is so good, so effortless, and so easy to use, so powerful in the game. give Ariana's Vow a try if you haven't already. I feel like most of you have already used it before. I feel like most people know how strong it is. It's S tier. It's S tier in PvP and in PvE. That's how good it is. I mean, it's a hand cannon with special ammo. It does like ridiculous amount of damage, and it's just absolutely decimates barriers. So I'm not going to spend too much more time talking about that one because I think we all know that one's really good. Okay. Next up, we have the Fatebringer. Okay, this just recently came back to us, the reprised version. And oh my goodness, I was talking to you about the Fatebringer, and a lot of people disliked this video. I was saying how the Fatebringer is literally so OP that Bungie is probably going to end up nerfing explosive payload or timed payload because of it. I think a lot of people misunderstood my video. They thought that I was trying to get the Fatebringer nerfed. I don't want the Fatebringer to get nerfed. What I think that might get nerfed is probably the fact that explosive payload and timed payload are like bugged and do 20% more damage. That's all I was trying to say, okay? It's probably going to get nerfed at some point in time. It's not my fault. Don't be mad at me, okay? Don't shoot the messenger. This weapon can roll explosive payload and frenzy, explosive payload and firefly, explosive payload and kill clip. That is insane. I mean, that is a god rolled weapon amongst all the god roll weapons. I mean, that is crazy that it can roll 2 damage boosting perks. I made several videos already talking about this, so I'm not going to talk about this too much longer, but just know that the god rolled Fatebringer is absolutely nasty, and it's not even the right archetype. It's not even the 180 archetype. It's the 140, and it's still absolutely S tier. You need this weapon if you don't have it already. It is a beast, and it will be really nice to use in Grandmasters when they come out this season. Next up, we have the Finite Impactor. Oh god, I feel bad. This one's going to hurt. The Finite Impactor is an Iron Banner hand cannon, reprised, brought back this season, and it is trash, unfortunately. For PvE, do not bring the Finite Impactor into PvE. If I see you in PvE using this bad boy, you are absolutely throwing. I'm sorry. The perks that this weapon can roll, okay? In slot 1, it can get Slideways, Under Pressure, No Distractions, Firmly Planted, Heating Up, and Killing Wind. Not the best. In the second perk slot, it can get One for All, which is pretty fire, but it's got Eye of the Storm, Iron Grip, Iron Reach, Multi-Kill Clip, and Elemental Capacitor. Now, One for All and Multi-Kill Clip, not too bad, but the other slot has like almost all the worst perks, all the like PvP design type perks, and really kind of the mid-tier perks. It does not have the best perks overall for PvE. It's not the right archetype. You still use this. I mean, you could rock like a One for All, roll with it, but honestly, this thing just doesn't have the best synergy, right? In one slot, you're going to want to have that optimal damage boosting perk like Rampage, One for All, and in the other slot, you're going to want to have like really good reload or a big magazine like Overflow. This kind of doesn't have that, so I have to put it all the way down in the D tier category. I'm sorry. Next up, we have the Hawkmoon. Now, the Hawkmoon is a hand cannon that I absolutely love. Okay, this thing is a beast. Really good in PvP. In PvE, it does have that like super damage boosting last shot, which is kind of nasty, but really it doesn't have any place in the current PvE meta. Like, you probably shouldn't be rocking the Hawkmoon when you're out in the PvE world. So I am going to put the Hawkmoon all the way down in the B tier category for PvE specifically, but of course in PvP, you know, let's not shit on the Hawkmoon too much. It is really good in PvP, but that's not the best for PvE. Just doesn't fit in the meta currently. Next up, we have the Igneous Hammer and the Igneous Hammer Adept. Okay, we're going to talk about both of these. We'll do a 2-for-1. It's a 120 RPM hand cannon. One of its better PvE rolls is going to be something like Subsistence, One for All, or Rapid Hit, One for All. Rampage is another perk it can roll on it. It's a good weapon overall, but the problem is it's that really bad archetype. Okay, it's got 120 RPM pace of shooting shots. It's going to have that low magazine, that slow reload. Really not going to be the best overall. I am going to put the Igneous Hammer all the way down in the C tier category. So go ahead and put this here. Igneous Hammer here in the C tier category. Feels bad. And unfortunately, the Adept version, there's no Adept mods that really make the weapon stand out so extremely well that I would be willing to put it up into the B tier category. So I'm going to throw both of these down here in the B tier category. I'm super sorry, but it feels bad. The Igneous Hammer just doesn't fit as well in the PvE meta. I love this weapon too. That's like one of my most used weapons, okay? Next up, we have the Iklos hand cannon. This thing is an energy void 180 RPM hand cannon that makes Warmind cells, all right? So we're already winning, okay? It has damage boosting perks. It's got Rampage on it. I mean, heck, it's even got Vorpal. I mean, I wouldn't really shoot a boss with a hand cannon, but it does have it there. You know, it's got Subsistence, Triple Tap, and Rampage in the other slot. I mean, this is a solid weapon. It's not something that you see a lot of because it doesn't have that explosive payload perk or timed payload perk. If it did, it would be in the S tier category, but because it doesn't, I have to put it in the A tier category, unfortunately. One day, if Bungie ever does nerf explosive payload or time payload, I'll do a completely different hand cannon chart, and I'll definitely put that weapon up in the S tier category. But for now, it will stay there. Next up in the alphabetical list right here, we have the last word. The last word, hand cannon. Now, while the last word is absolutely amazing in PvP, one of the best old Western hand cannons out there, and just completely destroys people, great time to kill. The last word doesn't have any place in PvE, okay? If you show up to anything in PvE with the last word, everyone knows you're throwing, okay? We all know you're throwing. There's no perk on it that seems to help in anything in PvE. They should give last word like anti-barrier or unstoppable or something like that, you know, just to make it somewhat viable in PvE. But right now, it has no chance, okay? No chance. Last word's going in the D tier category. Next up, we have the Lumina hand cannon. Now, the Lumina hand cannon, I actually quite like a lot, okay? It says right here, Blessing of the Sky, using a noble round on an ally, heals them and grants both you and them a weapon damage bonus for a short duration. That's actually kind of crazy in PvE, okay? You might not see this weapon that often because, again, people just don't like to use exotics on hand cannons. You get kind of teased if you do, especially with like things like Anarchy and, you know, Izanagi's Burden in the world. But the Lumina's hand cannon is actually really, really good. Oh, let me adjust that back there. Make sure I didn't mess that up too much. Perfect. The Lumina is actually really, really good. It is A tier is where I'm going to put it at. A tier for the Lumina. Next up, we have the Malfeasance hand cannon. All right, now we're talking here. We're back to the 180 RPM. Okay, this does bonus damage against taken enemies and Gambit invaders, which technically this is a PvE chart, but you know what I'm saying, we'll count Gambit as PvE. But and then it shoots tainted slugs and that burrow in the enemy, stacking each slug causes them to explode. It's actually not half bad of a weapon if you haven't used it in a while. Malfeasance is an exotic hand cannon. I haven't heard anyone talking about this in a hot minute. I'm going to put it down in the B tier category because the stacking of the slugs is actually not half bad, and it is actually pretty strong at taking enemies. We took out Morgoth with this hand cannon, and it was actually pretty fun. Next up, we're going to talk about the hand cannon from the Last Wish raid. It's called the Nation of Beasts. It's a 140 RPM. The rolls this thing can get on it are actually really good. If you can ever get a good roll to land for you, that is. It can roll in the damage boosting slot. We've got Kill Clip, Explosive Payload, which is that big boy perk that we definitely love. And then it's got Rampage and Triple Tap in that slot. Obviously, you're going with Explosive Payload. Explosive Payload, strongest perk in the game when it comes to activities in PvE. And then you could have Outlaw in the other slot, so you get that fast reload. I mean, that is nasty, nasty, nasty. We absolutely have to put this weapon in the A tier category. I mean, it's not the 180 archetype, but that is a really, really good roll. So Nation of Beasts, A tier, especially if you can get an explosive payload roll. A lot of you end up getting it, and it's the curated roll from Morgoth is where I tend to get it to drop a lot. And that one has Outlaw and Dragonfly, and that's also really good for ad clear. So not bad in that slot either. So keep that in mind. I have that roll set aside, but I don't have any roll with explosive payload, but I wish I did. That would be nice. Next up, we have, not to be confused with Nation of Beasts, we have Nature of the Beast, okay? They sound very similar, but they're wildly different weapons, okay? Wildly different. This one is a 180 RPM hand cannon that can actually roll Subsistence in one slot, which is going to be like its best magazine / reload perk. And then in the other slot, it can roll Dragonfly, which would be the best for like ad clear. And this is actually a pretty good weapon overall. It's a 180, and it has the decent ad clear. So we're going to actually have to put this in the A tier category as well. Here we go. Let's grab this bad boy. This thing is going to fire at a fast fire rate that we like. It's not going to make more mine cells, but, you know, it clears ads, clears them efficiently. It's got Dragonfly. You can put the Dragonfly spec on it. You could put Energy Accelerant on it. It's got Subsistence. I mean, there's no reason to not use this weapon. It's a very solid weapon. Obviously, people are going to stick with the S tier stuff, but, you know, if you want to use something outside the meta, do it, you know, and that's what this video is for, to show you what weapons are, you know, just outside the meta, but still very useful. Next up, we have the Palindrome hand cannon. This is a 140 RPM hand cannon, recently reprised back into the game. Really solid weapon overall. It has this one for all perk that I really like in Grandmasters, because in Grandmasters, what happens if you get Rampage procced, you don't have enough time to kill another ad before the Rampage timer runs out. So a perk like one for all tends to work really, really well. However, this weapon doesn't have explosive payload on it, but it does have some other really good perks. It's got Overflow. You can even have like Outlaw on it, Subsistence. So the Palindrome, I'm actually going to put in the A tier category as well. We're going to start running out of space in the A tier category in just a minute here. But don't worry, there's just a lot of weapons that are just, I couldn't quite put them in the S tier category because there's just a few hand cannons that are just too nasty. All right, so that's going to be the Palindrome and the Adept Palindrome. I'm going to put in the A tier category, so keep that in mind. Next up, we have the Posterity hand cannon. Now, this is one you get from the Deepstone Crypt, and the rolls this thing can get are crazy. I mean, Reconstruction Rampage is like that classic roll that I've told everyone to get. That's going to get a huge magazine and just mow through ads. I mean, that is going to be an absolutely killer build and absolutely fun hand cannon to use. I have that one. I love it. Reconstruction One for All, also really good. I have that roll as well. Very good hand cannon. I will have to put it in the A tier category, though, even though it's so very close to being S tier. You just can't quite compare this to the Fatebringer and its perks, especially because it can't get that explosive payload perk. So unfortunately, explosive payload, time payload, holding a lot of these hand cannons back from being truly insane. Next up is another S tier hand cannon, though. The 7th Serif Officer Revolver, okay? If you haven't been using this bad boy, you've been missing out because this thing is beast. S tier weapon. You wouldn't believe it. It can roll timed payload, which is that perk that you're chasing after, that time payload, explosive payload, 20% damage bonus. And then in the other slot, its perks really aren't the best. It can get like Ambitious Assassin, 4th times the charm, stuff like that, or even Threat Detector is pretty good, but it can make Warmind cells on top of everything. So not only does it have explosive payload, it does more damage, but then it's making Warmind cells. You shoot the Warmind cell, it goes boom, and everything around it just blows up. I mean, this hand cannon just has everything. This is an S tier weapon, something you definitely want to chase after, something you definitely want to get in the game if you don't already have it. Next up is the Steady Hand hand cannon that comes from Iron Banner. This is a 120 RPM, and the perks that this thing can get on it are just atrocious for PvE. I mean, you've got Swashbuckler, Wellspring, not half bad. It does get Outlaw, but it's going to have that small magazine, that terrible reload. I mean, the Steady Hand just really doesn't have any place inside PvE with the current perk roll it has on it. It doesn't have One for All. It doesn't have Rampage. So we are going to put Steady Hand all the way down here in the D tier category. Next up, we have the Sturm Exotic hand cannon. Now, this is an exotic slot being used in PvE on a hand cannon, and that hand cannon is a 120 RPM hand cannon. That's a lose-lose, and unfortunately, I do have to put the Sturm all the way down in the D tier category. It does have a cool perk where it says, kills with this weapon, fill the magazine of the equipped energy weapon from reserves. So it does have some nice little, like, sort of auto-loading capabilities that can come with it. But honestly, using your exotic slot on a 120 like this, and not rocking it with the Drang, and even if you did rock with the Drang, it's just silly, you know what I'm saying? And it just doesn't work very well in the current meta. Unfortunately, Sturm gets put all the way in the D tier category. Next up is the Sunshot. The Sunshot I actually like quite a bit. It's the fastest fire rate hand cannon in the game, at 150 RPM, and along with that, it does have Sunblast, which says targets killed with Sunshot explode in solar energy. So that's actually really cool. That's like Firefly type effect, and it's actually really strong in the current PvE meta. Unfortunately, you do again have to use that exotic slot on it, and that's going to be the only thing that holds this weapon back. But that set aside, I'm going to put the Sunshot all the way in the A tier category, and we are running a little bit out of space here, so I'll just stack it on top of here nice and neatly, and you can still see a little bit of the posterity there. And we'll move on to the next one. The next one is going to be the Survivor's Epitaph, which just came to us this season. All right, now we've got a kinetic. It's a 180 RPM hand cannon, and it does actually have some pretty good perks on it, okay? It can roll with Frenzy, One for All, Kill Clip, and it can, in the other slot, it can have Feeding Frenzy, it can have Subsistence, it can actually have some really good rolls on this weapon. So definitely don't be sleeping on the Survivor's Epitaph. Not a half bad weapon. Doesn't have that explosive payload or that time payload that you're looking for, though. So unfortunately, it will have to go in the A tier category. And next up, we're going to talk about the Thorn Exotic hand cannon at 140 RPM. It does have some really cool perks on it with Soul Devour. And truth be told, I like this weapon. I like the lore behind this weapon. This weapon really doesn't have much place in the PvE meta overall. It is pretty effective at killing ads, though, and it does give you a bunch of ammo back for all the ads you kill, so I will put it in the C tier category. Not the worst exotic hand cannon ever, not a D tier weapon, but definitely not the best. Next up, we're going to talk about the True Prophecy hand cannon, which is a 120 RPM hand cannon. It can roll with explosive payload and time payload, so it's got those really strong perks, and along with that, you could get Overflow, but unfortunately, besides Overflow, you really don't get the best reload perks on it. It does have Field Prep, but this weapon overall is a 120 RPM, that archetype you kind of want to stay away from. But since it does have those explosive payload perks, I do have to kind of rank it up a little bit higher. I am going to put True Prophecy in the B tier category for PvE because of those payload perks and because it does have some decent magazine rounds. But overall, you know, again, we're dealing with those 120s. On to the last hand cannon that we're going to rank, we have the Waking Vigil, an energy hand cannon, a 140 archetype. It's arc. It has some really great perks on it. It can roll with Dragonfly, it can roll with Kill Clip, it gets Outlaw, it gets Rapid Hit. These are some great perks for PvE ad clear. And it's for those reasons that I'm going to put the Waking Vigil in the B tier category, and that is going to be the finalization of this entire tier list. So just as I did last time, I will go over everything, making sure that I agree with all of my opinions, even though I've spent like hours beforehand making sure that I got everything exactly right. In the S tier category, I put the Ariana's Vow. That's definitely solid. I mean, it's a hand cannon that just takes out champions so well. It's such a workhorse in PvE. The Fatebringer, of course, is S tier. I mean, it's probably S plus tier with explosive payload and Firefly, super strong, and explosive payload and Frenzy, or even Kill Clip, really good. The 7 Serif Officer Revolver, such a good weapon. Makes Warmind cells along with the explosive payload, definitely S tier. Those are the only 3 hand cannons that are like true meta S tier weapons. Onto the A tier category, I do agree that the Ace of Spades is really good. Of course, using your exotic on hand cannon is a bit tough to do, especially before ad clear specifically. Next up, we have the Criminal's Dagger, really strong weapon. The rolls that this weapon can get are just absolutely insane, and it's definitely worth putting in the A tier category. The Crimson gives you health regeneration. The Iklos hand cannon makes Warmind cells and does have some pretty good rolls, and it's a 180, so definitely deserves to be an A tier. Lumina can give you health regeneration, damage boosts. For those reasons, I will keep the Lumina in A tier. Next up, we have Nation of Beasts. Now, this weapon can roll explosive payload, which has that super strong perk. Can roll outlaw explosive payload. Honestly, this weapon is almost S tier. It's hard to compare it to these 3 weapons because these weapons are just so unbelievably strong in the current PvE meta. But man, this weapon definitely deserves to be an A tier. Then we have Nature of the Beast, another 180 archetype, super strong rolls on it, great for ad clear, definitely a strong weapon. The Palindrome belongs here. The Posterity, the Sunshot, and the Survivor's Epitaph all belong in here. Those are all very strong and very solid weapons in the current PvE meta. Next up in the B tier category, we're going to have weapons that are really strong, but not nearly as strong as the A tier. First up, we have Ancient Gospel, which does have some really good rolls, but it is that 140 archetype. We have the Bottom Dollar, which is a 120 RPM. Definitely not the strongest archetype, but does have some really good rolls. The Hawkmoon has some pretty good perks for PvE. But again, you then have to use your exotic slot here. And the same thing with the Malfeasance, does have some pretty good strengths to it, but overall not the best and definitely not deserving of being outside of the B tier. The Steady Hand does have those payload perks and overflow, but it is a 120 archetype, and the Waking Vigil does have some really good rolls to it for ad clear, but I would definitely keep this in the B tier category. Next, we're going down to the C tier category. The Dire Promise definitely belongs down here, mostly used for PvP. Same thing for both Igneous Hammers and the Thorn. Those are all just PvP weapons, and the perks for them just work so much better in PvP. They really don't have much of a place in PvE. Lastly, in the bottom tier category, we have the Finite Impactor, which has some of the worst perks for PvE. The Last Word, which has no place, obviously, the Steady Hand as well, and the Sturm. All 4 of those weapons definitely belong in the D tier category in terms of the PvE meta as it is right now. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my opinions in the comment section below of this video. Also, let me know what kind of tier list you would like me to make next. Smash the like button and make sure to subscribe with notifications on if you want to stay up to date on all things Destiny 2. I'll see you in the next one. Later.